Good afternoon. Today is Tuesday, March 19th, 2019. This is the regular monthly meeting of the Citizens Finance Advisory Committee, also acting as the Citizens Oversight Committee for Measure Q. We're at Vets Hall, 3:30 p.m. We have all members present and a quorum established. So therefore, I'd like to call this meeting to order, and we will have a moment of silence. Okay, let's rise for the pledge, please. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, thank you and welcome everyone. So right now, are there any committee members' announcements? All right, seeing none, I'd like to welcome Tracy McConnell. Okay, Tracy McConnell is here for staff, filling in temporarily for Valerie, is that correct? Okay, thank you. As well as Sandy Martin and Jennifer Calloway from the finance staff, but welcome. You're welcome. Any staff announcements?
None today. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Public comment period for any items not on the agenda or for items for which you cannot stay for, please feel free. Seeing none, close public comment. And we will move on to the consent calendar. The consent calendar. Item A1 is approval of the minutes for last month's February 19th, 2019, regular Citizens Oversight Finance Advisory Committee.
Madam Chair, can I make one correction to those minutes?
Yes, please
Sandy
do.
Martin, our accounting and finance manager, was here, and she's not listed, so we need to add her.
Oh, that's right. You were Sandy. Okay, so under the staff present, we would have another name, and you'll correct that for the record before these get posted, I presume. I didn't see any other. Did anybody see any corrections, adjustments, or anything on the minutes from last month?
Yeah, I just saw one little typo under item 6. There's just a misspelled word in there, second line. I'm sure you'll see it. And then on item 4, just to maybe mention somehow that the first 3 motions pertain to Measure Q funds.
Oh, that's right. Okay, the 22,000, the SRO. You're right. And the fourth was my sweep motion to catch everything else after we had extensively reviewed the second quarter. Okay, so Jennifer or somebody can, Tracy, for those first 3 motions under item 4. And then under item 6, second word, replated is related, obviously. So when you add on Sandy's name, then we'll get that corrected. All right, so do I have a motion to accept the minutes as presented with the minor changes we've just discussed?
I'll move to approve.
All right, thank you, John. Second?
I second it.
Second by Bill Bose. Motion was made by John Martin, second by Bill Bose. All in favor, please?
Aye.
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 Any opposed? All right, motion carries 7-0. Thank you. That's item A1 on the consent calendar. That brings us to item B1, review of the second quarter investment report, July through December of 2018 for the fiscal year. The current fiscal year, 2018-2019. You all may remember this was an item on last month's agenda, but we did not get to that. So I think there was a question on there that someone had asked. Jennifer, you had answered that. So comments from anybody up here? This is item B1, the investment report.
I had some questions.
Or questions, sure. Go ahead, Homer.
How much cash do you feel comfortable having on hand at any given time to run the day-to-day operations of a city?
That's a little bit of a loaded question. I would say what we need to have now with construction of the wharf is a little different than what we needed to have a couple of years ago. Both our SRF planning loan is reimbursement based. Should we get funding for WIFIA and SRF, those are reimbursement based, so we have to have cash to advance those funds, depending on how we're able to get submittals in for reimbursement. The other challenge in talking with our brokers is that the long-term CD rates are not that much more than LAIF is earning right now. So their recommendation has been to keep money in LAIF unless we're looking at, a significantly large amount more. The interest rates are not that different. So we met with Rabobank yesterday on a variety of issues, one of those being our sweep account and some alternative options for that, because that is our lowest interest account. Internally, we're kind of revising our practices that if there's more than $2.5 million in there, there's going to be a flag to come up to kind of have a discussion about what to do with the extra and where to either transfer that or what to purchase with that.
How difficult is it to transfer funds from your disbursement accounts to LIFA?
They're not difficult, but there's a charge to do that. We have a transfer charge, so if we want to incur that every time, do you remember how much it is? Okay, we could have to look at how much that is, but we do try to avoid those fees.
Have you started to draw down the SRF planning loan?
We've been able to submit and receive one reimbursement, $220,000, I believe, to $280,000. I can't remember the exact amount. We have plenty of documentation and can continue to work on additional submittals, but we don't have time at this point to do that. We're trying to make time, but it hasn't. We haven't been able to get any more in.
If I recall correctly, both the SRF and the EPA loans, you don't start paying down the principal balances until after the project is completed. Is that correct?
Correct.
So for the next 3 or 4 years, cash management is going to be a significant aspect of your job?
Yes, that's correct.
Because it's a lot of money involved.
Right.
It is a lot of money involved. That's why I'm hesitant to do much more without taking time to really think through it. We have large cash balances. I mean, there's no question about that. I need to have time to think through what the right amounts are, given how those reimbursements are going to work, and I haven't had a chance to do that.
I think it's really important.
I don't disagree.
And I know that with the limitations of the CDs at $250, have you looked into T-notes or T-bills as an alternative investment?
I know you mentioned that when we met in my office. That's going to be a conversation with our brokers, and I was going to have some conversations about that. So it's on my list.
Okay. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Any other questions? I think, Jennifer, I would recommend you probably try to look at what those transfer fees are. Now, you said you had already, in your staff report, that you'd already converted some CDs, or were going to, in the approximate $2 million range. Is that correct? Did those come from the sweep account at Rabobank, or?
We transferred money since December. We've transferred money out of our sweep account into LAIF. We purchased 5 CDs.
Okay.
The State Farm CD, re-rolled that one over, and we are looking to purchase some more in the range of about another $1 million. But we haven't done that yet.
Okay. But those would come, that additional $1 million would come from the sweep account, I presume. All right. Any other questions from us? I think we just continue. We will be reviewing this quarterly and continue to monitor it. Go ahead, John. Yeah.
So, Jennifer, so Rabobank is not one of the LAIF depositories. There's actually a wire transfer charge that occurs?
Correct.
Okay.
Yep.
What do they have, like 3 or 4 different banks that if the city did business with a certain bank, then it would be a branch-to-branch transfer, but I guess that's out of the question.
Well, it's not out of the question. We'd have to do an RFP for new banking services if we were to transfer.
Okay. I don't know what the expense would be, but as far as the logistics, I think you can do up to like 15 transfers a month with LAIF. So it wouldn't be too difficult to move money in and out on a weekly basis, at least, as needs arise. So that's something you might want to take a look at.
Yeah, we can look and see what those transfer fees are. We've just been cognizant of trying to avoid fees. And in our discussion with Rabobank yesterday, we're looking at closing the sweep account since it is such a low interest-bearing account, revising what our balances are, and that would offset some of our other banking fees if we have a higher daily balance in our regular account. So we're trying to analyze some of that. And we haven't made any decisions yet, but looking at different options.
But the imputed interest rate on those are so low, you might as well just pay the fees. I mean, I understand that that's an additional amount on the expenditure side in your budget,
Right.
but you really would be money ahead by having that money in LAIF and just paying the analyzed charges.
Right.
Just one other small thing on your report. You report that the city's annualized yield is 1.54. I think that's a little bit of a typo. I think 1.514 is what the table shows. So before it goes to council, maybe take a look at that.
Okay, thank you. I'll correct that.
Okay. Go ahead, Dave.
Is the business relationship with Rabobank performed under an agreement?
A banking agreement. We don't have a contract. The contract
Is
with
the business
Rabobank.
relationship between the city and Rabobank under an agreement, under a contract?
I have not
Is there any requirement for that to be?
I haven't seen a contract for that. We must have signed something when we opened the accounts, I would imagine. There would have been, we get transaction fees and contracts for that, but I haven't seen an actual contract to retain that. We can look and see what we have.
Are there any ongoing expenses associated with the banking relationship with Rabobank?
We have monthly bank fees that we pay for transfers, we're setting up, we have positive pay on one of our accounts and we're setting that up on another to help prevent fraud. There's fees associated with that. There's deposit fees, AP fees on our checks. So we pay about, I'm going to say, $1,000 a month in fees.
Okay. So there's no competitive requirement for banking services like you would have for other types of business relationships that would be under agreements? In other words,
if we were to switch banks, we would do an RFP and get a quote for, fees and that kind of thing at that time. I'm not aware of any requirement that makes you do an RFP every so many years. I can check and see. I'm not aware that there is one. For example, with our audit firms, we usually do contracts that can extend out for 5 years, and then you do an RFP. I don't know that there's a requirement for banks with that.
yeah, typically for like any kind of consultant type contract, you're going to do an RFP and you're going to have an agreement with all the terms and conditions backing that up. But I was curious if banking would fall under that type of category. And then another question is, how was Rabobank selected and why are they continuing to be the city's banker without any kind of review or consideration of other banks?
So that's going to require a little bit of research on our end because I don't know how long we've used them, but I know that it's been much longer than any of us here. So I can check with our former finance director and see what she knows, or look in the files and see what I can find. Rabobank is merging with Mechanics Bank. That was just announced. Mm-hmm. So that was part of our conversation yesterday, where some of the expectations, at least at this time, with the merger and what we can expect. One point we had talked about doing an RFP for banking service. Again, it comes down to priorities and what we have capacity to do. Changing a bank is very cumbersome and time consuming. That's
Yeah.
not a reason not to do it, but to get all of your accounts changed and to get all of your, EFTs where we get money from the county, you have to update all those accounts and make sure there's, nothing falls through the cracks. So we would need to make sure we have significant time to do all of that.
Do you have any idea how much the city spends with Rabobank as far as fees are concerned every year?
Well, it's about $12,000 in
Okay,
that
so
range.
it's not a huge amount of money, $12,000. Okay.
Like I mentioned, we are adding positive pay, so that will increase slightly because there's fees for that. But it's a fraud protection mechanism, so it's important to have that. We have had several attempted frauds on our accounts where people are mocking up checks. So as just another safeguard to make sure those don't get cashed and we don't incur any losses, we're adding that.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Yep.
So thank you, Jennifer. I think that's good that you're meeting with them. If I'm not mistaken, Rabobank was very recently acquired, so I think I would kind of monitor those fees and everything, and I agree with you. It's not an easy job to change. Meet with them and, continue to, emphasize, for the volume of business, you expect fees to be appropriate. So, okay, I think that concludes the discussion on that. Thank you for that report. We'll continue to see that quarterly and monitor that as well. So that brings us to item B2, discussion and input on preparation of Measure Q fiscal year budget for the next fiscal year, 2019 to 2020. So we'll open, first of all, I guess I'll open that up for public comment if there's any public comment on item B2, Measure Q. Seeing none, close public comment. All right, thank you for the staff report. Let's start off with this discussion. And thank you for the additional information because that helps. The staff report just had the categories. I think several of us had the same question.
Yep.
But Jennifer, do you want to make any comments, please?
Yeah, I want to add one on the police, kind of the ongoing request that was responded to. We missed the standby pay, and that runs about $24,000 a year. So just wanted to add that on there. That was my oversight. And then just to kind of give some context for what this is in front of you, I think we heard from the committee last year that we missed the mark a little bit on some of the requests and supplementing, ongoing operating expenditures from the general fund with Measure Q funds. So we wanted to bring this to the committee and give you a chance to give us some feedback before we go back and develop the budget. I don't think that we, as a staff, we're aware that it's likely not all of these items are going to be in the proposed budget. There probably won't be enough resources available to do that unless we have some miracle cure between now and the time we get that budget proposed. But again, wanted to get feedback from the committee on what items you would maybe not support, so we don't try to include those and miss the mark again from your perspective. So the fire chief, police support services manager, and acting commander, and our public works director are here. They can come up and offer some insight into any of the items on here or just kind of any history of Measure Q, since we do have a couple new members to the committee, if that's helpful. Otherwise, we can just answer questions.
Oh, okay, thank you. Why don't we start here with questions or discussion? Bart, did you have any questions or comments on the Measure Q? Item B2, okay. Dave?
Under police, what are first responder kits? $20,000.
Good afternoon, committee members. Bonnie Johnson, Moore Bay Police Department. First responder kits basically are kits that are ballistic helmets, the bulletproof vests, as well as medical kits, which include tourniquets, anything that they would need for first response if a major calamity happened in the area. They're fitted to each individual officer that is put into their patrol car at the beginning of each shift, instead of like a kit per car, because you have a 6'4" officer and a 5'3" officer can't share a kit, but they may share a car. So they're individualized per each officer. So it would be roughly about $20,000, little over $1,000 per officer for each kit.
Okay, thank you. And then promotional items, $3,000. What does that include? What's the purpose for that item?
So throughout the year, the police department goes to a lot of events like, drawing a blank, National Police Week, at Farmers Market, the Avocado Margarita Festival, National Night Out, and then there's the Cops and Kids Day at like the Madonna Field area. And each of the departments have on a table basically items for kids to come and get promotional items from each police department. It could be bracelets, water bottles, pens, pencils, things like that, just different little items, as well as one thing that we're wanting to incorporate is fingerprint kits for parents, where we would have a rolling kit and it's a piece of paper that they could keep with them that has each of their kids' fingerprints on them. So if their child went missing, it's got their dental records, their medical records with their blood type, their fingerprints on there, etc. So it's basically promotional items to give away at special events. We're asking for a little bit more than what we usually have been spending, because we've been a little short on having items for each event.
Okay. The automated license plate reader cameras, can you tell us about that? And I didn't see a estimated cost for that.
Yeah, we just got that cost back from a vendor today. It's not particularly the vendor that we would pick. We want to do a little bit more research, but I wanted a ballpark figure. So automatic license plate reader system would be, what we're looking at is either a fixed camera in specific locations. We have 2 locations that we're looking at, or they can be mounted to each patrol vehicle. And what they do is there's a database that collects information from stolen vehicles, wanted people, etc. And the license plate reader will read a license plate in a moment's notice. And if it scans a license plate that fits the criteria of somebody wanted, it'll notify officers. For example, Grover Beach just were able to arrest somebody for, and I apologize, a pretty significant crime. It was either a murder or an armed robbery. Same as a Tascadero. Driver was driving through a Tascadero, automated license plate reader system, scanned the car. They went on pursuit, pulled the person over on Spring Street in Paso Robles, and were able to make an arrest for somebody that they'd been somewhere in the state had been searching for quite some time. So that camera system for the static one is about $64,000 over a 5-year period. It's $35,000 for the first year, and then about $7,000 for the 7 years afterwards. And then a mobile unit, I believe, is right around $30,000, somewhere in there. We were just looking through all the figures, and I think we already have some of the equipment that they had quoted us for. So it's a little under $30,000.
Okay, so that's going to be something that's within the city manager's authority to award. Obviously, it's going to go into the budget. You're talking about surveilling people, so I hope that you will have some discussion at council, and that council buys into that type of thing.
Yeah.
Okay. And then can you explain the weapons training simulator?
I'm going to have to read through this because it's not something that I'm super accustomed to, but I do have brochures if anybody wants to look through it. But basically how they're dry fire is the safest and most efficient way to increase an officer's skills regardless of their experience. It allows you to increase proficiency with draw, sight acquisition, and trigger control. It improves speed and accuracy of reloads, assists in controlling breathing and heart rate, and allows an officer to incorporate movement. Fundamentals are made flawless by building muscle memory through repetition. This system can be used in a training room, outside, schools, banks, and anywhere that you want to be prepared for a major event that arises. So it's basically a computerized system with guns that sound, they're the exact same weight and feel as the officer's current guns that they carry, and they can basically do a simulated drill. So they could prepare it at the high school. They could go through a simulated training, which would be a great tool for teachers as well as students to be able to get the exact feel of what it would be like if such a horrible event happened at our city, because you never know quite how you're going to react in a situation till you're in it, and this would be the easiest way to prepare officers, bystanders, etc. But it really goes down to the muscle movement and the feel of it when you're in a situation. So it's a simulator it's basically a computerized program in the guns.
Okay, so I'm trying to get a sense of what this would look like. Is this like a video game type of thing?
It's much like a video game, kind of like a Wii system where,
Okay.
you can practice your golf swings or whatever, but it's to this caliber.
So it's a totally portable type thing that you
Yeah,
could either
it's
use it
portable.
at the police station or you take it on site.
Correct.
Okay, all right. That's all. Thank you.
So on the list of items here that was sent back to us in response to a question, there's one item there, CAD to CAD 5,000. So are we now certain that that's all it's going to cost? It's not going to cost 24,000 like what was in the 18-19 budget?
Yeah, I figured out earlier today where I had gone wrong with that figure. Prior to moving the bomb and drug and task force contract and CAD to CAD to Measure Q, the total budget expense was $24,000, $14,600 for the bomb, drug, and task force contract, and then an additional $6,000 for the CAD to CAD. So it's not $24,000 for the CAD to CAD. It's a quarterly bill of about a little over $1,500 each time. So the total for the bomb, drug, and task force as well as the CAD to CAD would be about $24,000.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that. So then on the first responder kits that David asked about, is that something that has been being paid for by the general fund until now?
We don't have them currently.
Don't have any at all?
The officers have just bulletproof vests, but not ballistic helmets and to the caliber of a first responder kit.
Okay.
Go ahead, Homer. Thanks, John. Okay.
Well, I just don't have the history, and I'd be a little interested in hearing that since there was a comment about the safety issues, not wanting to repeat that. So if I could just get a little history, that I'd appreciate it.
Sure. I'm actually going to have the fire chief come up because he was here when Measure Q was passed and was part of that whole effort. So he can speak a little bit. And then I should have mentioned our chief is out at training, our police chief, so thanks to Bonnie and the acting commander for coming to fill in. And fire chief has to leave at 4:50 to go provide an award for one of our firefighters, our captain, actually. So maybe if there's fire questions, we can ask those too, so he can get off to present his firefighter award.
Thank you, Jennifer, and
Welcome.
thank you, committee. As I was thinking back today about how this whole process started and how successful our community saw a need and helped solve a problem. This all started in 2003 with the Emergency Services Ad Hoc Committee that was appointed by the City Council. I happened to be assigned to that committee. It took us about 18 months, 2 years to come up with results that resulted in a 5-year strategic plan for the fire department. At that time, we were only able to respond to about 85% of our calls. Well, we were short personnel. We had apparatus that was way out of date, that was not OSHA compliant. We had equipment such as our SCBAs or protective personal equipment that the firefighters have to wear. OSHA has mandates how long they have to be, we can use them, and then we have to get rid of them. And then we went into Measure Q. We went into the election of that, and then became the Measure Q committee, and we moved forward. The whole results of Measure Q came from the Emergency Services Ad Hoc Committee's suggestions how we're going to increase revenues to help support is public safety. To be honest, at that time, we were really severely underfunded, and we didn't have any future 5 years away. And what really bothered the committee and also the fire department at the time was that we were only able to respond to 85% of our calls because we didn't have a second unit to be able to run to our simultaneous calls, which run between 11 and 14% every year on average since 2003. So the success story out of it is that since 2007, that we have been able to respond to 100% of our calls since 2007. We updated our fleet at the fire department through creative financing, through donations with supplemental help from the Measure Q like we did last year with the purchase of our replacement engine. We replaced equipment that is OSHA mandated that we can't find in the general fund and or is mission critical. On the fire department side, and I can know this because I wrote that report for the Measure Q request, every request we make is either OSHA mandated or critical to the mission so that we can respond to close to 1,900 calls or 2,000 calls a year and provide the service that the community voted to have. And since then, I'm looking forward to the future, but if it wasn't for Measure Q, I know I can speak for the fire department. I know I can also speak for the police department. A lot of the stuff that we have today that is mission critical, we won't be able to sustain. And I know we're going to have to make some tough decisions the next couple of years with the general fund, and I'm very open to discussions and to come up with options. But your staff, both at the police and fire department, has been super creative to make this work. So.
And if I can just elaborate a little bit more, the measure or the sales tax was passed as a general tax measure, meaning that it can be used for any general fund purpose. However, it was advertised for police, fire, public safety, and roads and storm drains. So, in order to comply with what the citizens felt the intent of that ballot measure was, the council has passed resolutions which restrict the use to public safety, roads, storm drains. So every year we bring forward a budget request to this committee, and this committee's responsibility is to recommend if it complies with the intent of the ballot measure. Does that help? Thanks.
Anything else, Lois? Okay, thank you. Bill?
Yeah, where is the detail that we're talking about for fire department and police department? Where was that? That's not in the...
I think what was in there was just some general ideas, or not ideas, but requests. It's a list. But then in our questions that some of us had, it was, well, this is all well and good, but can you give us more detail on the financial amount so we know what you're asking for? Are these $3,000 items or
So that's one of the
$300,000?
questions that was
Yes.
answered today?
So what Jennifer sent out yesterday did have some more detail in response to the questions and the amounts. But I
Okay.
have the same. In fact, he can look at that.
All right.
He doesn't have it. But I have some of the same. I was trying to figure out, part of this was just a wish list, because I was trying to figure out what would be remaining for streets if we were to approve every single thing on here. And it seemed that would be shortchanging the streets, compared to what we have in the past. And so those are all good questions, tough decisions. He's right.
Yeah, and what we were hoping for was, if last year's discussion was, particularly with police, we don't want to take from the general fund and fund it in Measure Q. So if there's something on here, CAD to CAD, for example, that you're not interested in supporting, we'd like to know that now before we go through and develop the budget and come back with it in there, and then have to go back to the blackboard.
So I think the committee is interested in supporting a lot of this. We just kind of want to know what's the subtotal fire, police. I heard from some citizens at some of the meetings that they felt the police had been shortchanged in the past. Maybe that was due more to the SRO that we didn't have for a year and a half. But regardless, we want to fulfill as many needs as possible and still be fair to all of these are good cause. And everything that's been brought to us in the past does relate, I think, to Measure Q. So That's what I was trying to get. What's the subtotal of all of these? And also, Lois, this Measure Q supported the fire station. That's, we have 33 years left or 32 years left of debt to service on that, so the new fire station.
So is there a subtotal of these for police and fire department? Do we have that? I guess we could have added the pieces.
We do have one for fire.
Duplication.
Police they were still getting some of their numbers together, but let's see.
Do you know?
This is an email she sent out. When did she send this?
Monday.
Just yesterday?
Yeah.
Okay.
Last night, okay, yeah.
So the fire total would be about $510,000. Keep in mind that these are estimates. We're still working through our salary and benefit stuff, but 510 for fire. And then Bonnie's going to get me the remainder of the police costs that she was still refining.
I don't think we need that. We can just press on with the rest of the meeting.
Okay. Homer, you had some comments.
I don't have any specific questions, but I do have some comments. Having been involved with this for 13 years, when Measure Q was passed, the voters were told it was to supplement items that the general fund couldn't support. But it wasn't to backfill the general fund. And that's basically been the rules over the years. Your email of last evening where you mentioned that as times go forward, it would look like public safety is going to rely more and more on Measure Q for some previous items that were funded in past years by the general fund. And I'm not suggesting that's bad or good, but what I am suggesting, since the rules appear to be changing, that assuming that my colleagues would agree that we write a formal letter to the City Council suggesting that they debate the use of more and more Measure Q funds to fund things that used to be in the general fund. Because keep in mind, every one of these items that public safety is looking for is one less street that's going to get paved next year. So I think it's about time that maybe, it's been 13 years, that just this be revisited. And I don't know if my colleagues agree with that or not, but.
So if I can just respond, we included the fact that the general fund is projected to have a deficit. It was not the intention that we are this year or in 1920 proposing to supplement that deficit with Measure Q funding. So that was the intent of giving you this wish list. For example, body-worn cameras, well, they were typically funded in the general fund. If you make the argument that they are not a requirement by law to have, it is an optional item. If the committee says they don't want to fund it and we can't fund it in the general fund, then that's what the choice would be. And that's what we wanted to get an opportunity to have feedback from. We don't intend to take $324,000 from Measure Q to make up that deficit. We're working outside of that. That's not to say in future years it's not a conversation, and you're ahead of that, so that's great. But I just wanted to clarify, we weren't trying to make that point with this staff report.
No, I understand, and I really am a big supporter of public safety, but I just, there's others in the community that may want to have a discussion about this versus the streets.
Yes, Jennifer, and that's why I was asking just for a rough estimate. First of all, I don't want to tell the police and fire management they're experts in what their personnel need. And so sometimes it's a little difficult. They can prioritize it, I think, easier than some of us. But in the past, it seems like we were, I don't want to say subsidizing, but Measure Q was providing, $375,000, $390,000 a year for fire okay? So if that jumps up to 110 and police jumps up a couple 100,000 more, like Homer says, then that means the 500, 600,000 we were finally paying for streets just the last few years, before that it was less, is going to drop down to 200,000 or 300, which means those are going to be done every other year like we had before. And that's where you're going to hear citizens on the other end coming up and saying, hey, what's going on? So it's a balancing act. I would prefer to say something like, if you can keep your expenditures consistent with previous years, with the exception being the police, because we had that little anomaly with the SRO, that or a little inflation kicker in there, certainly, because the Measure Q fees are going up, without shortchanging the streets, that might be a better discussion for your citizens. So there's no citizens right here in the audience to advocate for the streets, but as in many of our decisions or council decisions, they will be at city council meetings, I'm sure, if that gets cut. So that's why I was asking for those numbers and trying to, there's nothing here specific I would say don't fund. You know, if you as a leader think that's needed, and fine, but you may have to prioritize the management. Bart?
Yeah, I think probably that's a great idea. It's like the SRO, which child don't you want to keep or something? And I think going at it more of, here's an amount of money for these, because otherwise you get into, you don't want to protect the fire people. You don't want to do this. You don't want to do that. You know, it's like, it's really, I don't think, a fair way to approach this, because all of these would be great, as well as a lot of other things would be nice. So I would be more inclined to go along with, I think, where Barbara's going, and that's basically look at the expenditures for police and fire last 3 or 4 years. If there's a blip, that's fine. But this seems to be taking a pretty major jump up. And before Measure Q, all of this per homer sounds like it probably was under the general fund. So we're just creeping in there, not the 324. But I like your suggestion, Barbara, to go with let's amount of money, because they're all good things to do.
In other words, bring back a budget fairly consistent with previous years, put an inflation factor in there, and anything exceptional over and above that, maybe some justification. Any public comment on that? Did I see anybody here? Yeah. Go ahead, Chief Knuckles.
Thanks again for allowing me to speak. I'll make this really short. Is that all the items in the fire department that were requested is off a replacement schedule that is established by rules by NFPA and OSHA. So there will be some years where I don't have much request. Mm-hmm. Then all of a sudden I have 15 turnouts to replace. I can't, and on the budget issued in the past in 2003, the general fund could not support purchases for PPE. We relied almost solely on donations and grants at that time. If you look at our budgets back in the 90s and back in the early 2000s, it was a struggling time for your fire department to keep its doors open. And so a lot of the purchases that we're requesting today are, again, either mission critical and or mandated by OSHA that cannot be funded by the general fund, but the cycle is not consistent. So yeah, I really support having consistent funds and percentages going to each department, because we have to be fair with the general funds, or excuse me, with Measure Q funding. But when the fire department, our requests are going to go up and down through the years because of the lifetime use of these different items that have life expectancies on them that we have to replace due to OSHA.
Thank you for that explanation. John, please go ahead.
Well, I would, first of all, I'd hate to see the amount of money available for road work to fall below $500,000. I think that's something that was achieved and shouldn't be allowed to slip, because once it slips out below that, it's just going to keep going down. I think it'd be helpful to this committee if, when you come back next month, if the items you're requesting that are not the recurring items, so the recurring items are one thing. Those are granted. I mean, those are already pretty much authorized, right? Like the fire engine that's on a payment plan, the fire station debt, even the body cams. My understanding is the body cams last year, this committee approved $22,000 per year for 5 years, $110,000 total. Is that right? Okay, so that's a recurring item for the next 4 years. So you add up all those recurring items, you've got in excess of $500,000 already baked in, another $500,000 for roads. You're only forecasting 1.1 million, so you're only talking about 100,000, maybe probably less than that, really, that will have to fit all the other requests in. And so I would like to see some kind of prioritizing done to give us an idea of what are the most important projects or what are the best opportunities. And just looking at the list that you gave us, it looks to me like the repeater replacement is probably the most mission critical item. You listed these two options, option A, option B. One is just a repair job, the other one is a replacement. I'd like to know a little more about that and how critical that is. And then you've talked about doing a grant matching to replace mobile and handheld radios. It seems like if you could use a little bit of Measure Q to leverage a lot more benefit, that might be a smart thing to prioritize. But these are things that you'd have to do and prioritize for us so we could take a look at them.
I'll let the chief speak a little bit about the repeater. When we're back here in April, you'll have a proposed budget in front of you, so at that point they'll be prioritized. Again, we were just looking to see if you weren't interested in supporting promotional items. We wanted to know that now, instead of coming with that for you and saying that you weren't.
Well, on that specific item, I would say that would not have been a selling point to the voters for Measure Q. So that one item I would scratch off personally.
Fair enough, and that's what we wanted to hear. Is if there were things that stood out, I'd rather have the conversation today than in April when we're well down the budget process and have a pretty much developed process or developed budget, and then have to go back and figure out what we're going to change and how we're going to do that. So those are the kind of comments and feedback we wanted today.
Thank you, Jennifer and committee, about the repeater site. So we're looking at all different options right now. We're actually looking at 4 different options to standardize and solidify our repeater site. Our repeater site was put in the 80s up in a building up on Black Hill. It has some deficiencies, and every year we're going through and making sure that most of it is getting water on the equipment. Last year, Measure Q paid for some antenna movements to help us out with it. But we're also looking 5 years down the road, because that's our job to do that. Our repeater site used to be up on Nutmeg, and because of contract disputes that we had with the cellular site up there, that was a great site up there, secure, out of the weather, in a nice concrete vault. But we can't use that anymore. So 2 or 3 years ago, we paid for a study to look at what's the best options for Morro Bay for the next 20, 30, 40 years, because it is a critical piece of equipment for us. Also, in the near future, both of our dispatch centers are moving in together. They're going to be moving together on Kansas Avenue. So both police and fire will be in the same room in the future. And so we're also looking at how our repeater site is going to attach to that. So currently, our Black Hill repeater sends its information, both police, fire, and harbor, and Coast Guard, over to the repeater site in Los Osos. And then from the repeater site in Los Osos, it sends it to the 2 different dispatch centers that we have, both at the Sheriff's Department and also at County Fire. In the future, we may be able to going almost all internet, because we may be required to do that. It may be even cheaper in the future. So right now we're looking at 4 different options. We're looking at one just to band-aid what we have now, just to keep on seal coating that building, put a new roof on it, and keep it around for 5 more years to see what happens with our new dispatch center. We do have to look at our secondary repeater site at 1405 Teresa. We're looking at that for options so that we can band-aid it for the next 5 years, so we can get a radio frequency down South Bay Boulevard. That's one of our dead spots in town. So right now we're looking at options. I'm kind of leaning towards, let's not go for the big option right now, but moving it to the fire station. That is part of the plan for the future. I like to see just band-aid it right now, see where it's going to go, see how the new dispatch center is going to be, what kind of infrastructure we're going to be looking at, and that's what we're looking at. So it's going to be between $10,000 to about $22,000 may be the request. We're still working on it this week and next week.
I've got a question for the chief. Chief, one of the items, matching funds for possible federal Fire Act grant for mobile and handheld radios. Is that grant, how certain are you that you could get that grant, number one? And then number two, is that grant funding applicable to your repeater system, as far as upgrading your repeater system, in addition to handheld and mobile radios? And then I wanted to ask you a question about internet. You mentioned internet communications. I want to ask you about that after you answer.
Oh, you bet.
The grant
So,
question.
they're two different things. The handheld radios are the one like I have sitting
No, I
on
know
the
what
seat
I know
back
what a
there.
handheld and I know what a mobile
Okay.
radio is. I don't need an explanation on that.
So basically, it's a scheduled replacement, not just for us, but of all for emergency services in our community. It's a 10% match for the grant. We did the same thing last year. I thought we were pretty successful with Homeland Security to get the grant. It was for a total cost of $140,000 to replace all our handheld radios, and we'd be good for 10 to 15 years. And but we didn't get the grant. The money stayed in Measure Q. This year, we're estimating the cost of all the red radio replacements to be $160,000, and that's a 10% match at $16,000. Actually, the grant's not due till end of May. We have it all ready to go, ready to fly, and we're going to submit it again. And if we do not get the grant, then again, the funds will be staying into Measure Q.
Okay, so this grant is just for handheld and mobile radios. It would not be, you would not be able to use it for the backbone repeater system where these radios use to communicate with each other. Is that correct?
That's correct. FEMA and Homeland Security usually, they're very specific on the guidelines that they give us what we can apply for. And right now, they're not funding for facilities, which is a repeater site, but they're funding for firefighter safety, which is a handheld radio. And so that's how we're squeezing that in.
Now, you mentioned internet communications as opposed to broadcast radio type communications. How would that be achieved? Would you do it via Wi-Fi networks in the city, or how would you be able to connect to the internet to do that?
So when I say we're going to be using the internet, that's going to be for the long range dispatching. So from here to Kansas Road, there'll be a T1 line internet to there. The federal government's trying to reduce some of the radio waves going around our country because they are unhealthy and they can be unhealthy to us. But we still will have a repeater site in town. So how it would work is I key up my mic, it'll hit our repeater site, the repeater site puts it on the internet, and then we'll go to the dispatch center. What I see happening in the future, which I think is a good deal, is how we got our dispatch center today. It's a regional, San Luis Obispo County regional dispatch system. There's no reason why someone in Kansas can't be dispatching us in the future, because that's going to reduce our costs. Santa Maria just built their dispatch center. They built for the future because they know the internet dispatching is coming up, and they built enough space in their facility that why can't they dispatch for Costa Mesa? To keep those costs down, because dispatch services is expensive.
Okay, so is there anything on the horizon as far as mobile communications using the internet, using Wi-Fi instead of using radio transmission which it's a radio, obviously Wi-Fi is a radio, but still being able to use that instead of having a repeater backbone system?
So California, they're developing a system. The federal government has been requiring the studies into it. It's called FirstNet. So instead of using the traditional radios that we have today, it'd be using the cell phone frequencies that we have throughout this nation. There's more cell phone repeater sites in this nation than there are emergency repeater sites. So AT&T was given a contract by California. They're looking at broadbanding our communications through cellular phone and internet. So just like today, if you use your cell phone, most of the time it hits a cell phone site, it may hit the internet and make the phone call for you. You may be talking through the internet. So they're looking at that technology because the private sector has much better, robust backup systems, And New York City has been using cellular phone frequencies for decades in their city. So they're a prime example how their communication works. I don't know if you remember that old Nextel commercial that came out about 5 years ago, and firefighters were on their cell phones talking.
Yeah.
So,
Okay, great, thank you.
all right.
Thank you. Okay, go ahead, Lois.
All right. I just want to make a comment about the roads again, because the CAFR states that to maintain at the standard would take $1.5 million a year. So we don't want to lose sight of how important it is to make sure that we continue to use this money for road maintenance.
That's a good point, and I think I've even heard a higher estimate. That's a PCI standard of 70, and Mr. Liveck, I think you've said occasionally it goes from 1.5 million to 2 million a year if we were to get them all up to that. So whatever the amount is, it's more than we've been, triple or so more than what we've been spending. So that's why our focus is on that as well. So. Okay, so where do we want to go with this? We want to see a budget. I don't think we're prepared to tell you we don't want any of this. Did you get the number for the police, those totals?
170.
Oh, 170 then.
So maybe I can summarize what I'm hearing from you.
Okay.
And you can correct me if I'm wrong. To the extent possible, understanding there's some cyclical needs in there. We want to allocate at least $500,000 to roads, not fall short of that, and try to stay consistent between police and fire from prior years with taking out anomalies and recognizing there's going to be some ups and downs for various mandated requirements. I did hear you're not a big fan of the promotional items for the police, so unless there's some extra money hanging around, that probably wouldn't be included in the proposed budget. But everything else I'm hearing, if it comes back, would be generally supported if we're within those allocations.
You guys in agreement with that? Yeah.
Maybe.
Yeah.
Well, doing the math to make sure we're clear here, 500,000 for the roads, 170. That's 670 minus 1.1.
It's 1180. It's about what it is. I think.
So if we add what the fire is asking for, what number are we at?
1180. I think.
You're about 100,000
Over.
Yeah.
Request 100,000 over projected Measure Q.
What's the carry?
We had about 145, and we just spent about 70 with the police SR equipment. So you're about another 70,000.
75. So you got 75 towards the 100.
Correct, and I can't tell you what this year will be.
And one of the problems here is that your revenue forecast, is that going to change? Do you anticipate? The only reason is that you're planning flat, and the Federal Reserve doesn't agree with you.
So these are not my numbers. These are our sales
No, I
tax
understand.
consultant who has much more experience than I do.
Right.
I won't be changing them unless the city manager, wants to change them. My recommendation would be to stick with them.
Would HDL submit new numbers to you before you finalize the budget?
I will check with them before we get, right as we're getting towards the end. It's much easier to add to a budget than to try to figure out where to take away. So early April, I'll be checking with them and see if they have any updates. Last year they didn't change or they didn't revise, so I'm not necessarily anticipating that they will, but I will check with them.
And let's keep in mind, storm drains was one of the items mentioned. I think when I brought that up toward the end of last year, it was noted that, well, we needed to get everything settled, and now that we do have it settled, we can start addressing that. I sense we're looking at 0 for storm drains, so which was specifically addressed in Measure Q. So I think the council probably needs to recognize, are we going to punt on storm drain issues for Measure Q, or should that be included as well? Because that was very specifically part of what was passed.
Good points, I think, and I don't think 500 is excessive on the streets. That's no inflation, even though Measure Q has gone up 50, 75,000 a year. So I don't think we're going to agree that we want to lower that anymore. If anything, it should be raised. So those are kind of the parameters, I think, of what we're saying.
Okay, I think we've got that clear.
Okay, anything else on that item, or can we move on? And Jennifer, if you need me to summarize anything or I'd be happy to try to do that.
Okay, well, we'll come back in April and see what we have.
Okay.
And if the committee wants to address ongoing budget deficits with Measure Q with the council, we can do that either in April at a later date. We are working internally on how to, the council's asked us to come back with revenue options. We're working internally on how to solve some of those out years without using Measure Q money. That's not really on our radar as an option. So,
Well, I think you've heard our discussion, and even on the thing like the grant, the 16,000, if they don't get for a 10%, I think
Right.
Dave or somebody asked, what's the chance of getting it? We don't know. But if you don't have to expend a consultant like we do on WRF to go after the grant, and you can do it with your existing staff, then that's something you probably want to pursue, and that's something we may want to support if the payback is 10 to 1,
Right.
9 to 1,
Absolutely.
whatever it is.
okay.
So anyways, you have our comments there. Thank you.
So these Measure Q funds that we approved, does that have to get expended this year? Or these are just allocated and we'll now maybe spend the money next year? Are we operating this on a cost basis, or is it?
Well, no, we approve it in the budget. If they don't get expended, there will be a carryover. We used to have a carryover report or accumulation fund, and last year we had 145,000 that were not spent because combination of the revenues going up and some other costs coming in lower. That was just what we discussed the last time on the SRO. Typically, we use the carryover for streets. But last time, because the SRO came up in the middle of the year, we agreed that we would support that.
Well, this is so late in the fiscal year anyway, it would seem that the monies we're talking about are not going to get expended this year, so you'll have a large carryover.
This would be for next year's budget.
This for
the
next
one that
year's
would
budget.
start July 1.
This is not 18-19, this is 19-20?
1920.
These are
next
just
fiscal year.
ideas for when we're developing the proposed budget
I
for
got you.
July.
I'm with you.
But they have to have it in the budget, so that's why we're discussing it now. Okay, thank you. That takes us to item B3, the budget in brief. So this is one of our favorite subjects. We've been discussing this for probably a year now. And we had an excellent subcommittee, and several of us are even former members that worked on this. This is a brochure. It's an expansion of what we did a couple years ago, where we simply put some pie charts together reflecting the general fund and a couple of the enterprise funds, put them on the website. This has more detail, and I asked Jennifer to bring it back so that we think we're finished with this. Has a lot of information on it. I'm interested in any comments or anything. Otherwise, we would like to get it out there and see what the citizens say. So it is in your packet. It would be like a trifold. Jennifer, any comments on this? I know I had asked you to go back and we had a lot of discussion on all the transfers and trying to make that understandable to the layman. I'm not sure we've done that here, but we did our best.
So the last comment was on the transfers. You're correct. It did separate them out for source of funds under citywide data with the revenue piece. Couldn't do it as easily with expenditures, but that is something we're working towards with the 1920 budget. So hopefully I'll get that straightened out for the next budget. And hopefully adding the different revenues, as in money actually coming in versus the transfers in, helps to clarify at least the revenue side of that. So ideally, we'd be able to get this approved for the last few months of this fiscal year, and then we'll have something to start with for 1920.
Thank you. Any comments?
This hasn't gone out yet, is that right?
Well, by gone out, we were
It's
going to put it on the
is it,
website.
or not?
And so once we get this approved, we'll we can share it with the council, and we'd have copies out in the public access buildings in our, City Hall and over at Public Services. The intention being, we could put it on the website, but somebody could walk in and just grab it and get a general idea of what the city's budget is for the year.
It would seem we should get this out a lot sooner next year. Is that the objective?
We went, Bill, through several iterations of this because of all the transfers in and out. It was a little, some of us felt it was somewhat confusing or misleading as to, but like right now, if you look on the general fund, the upper left there, the 12.7 million, that is the revenue for the general fund before all the transfers and everything. So you have a city that's operating on 12.7 million a year in general fund. Then you get onto the pie chart and you see, 75% of that is salaries, and that was the initial.
I think it's a wonderful depiction. It does a very good job. The only comment I would make is the transfers in, when you show the balanced budget, maybe even a footnote to say the vast majority of the transfers in are the monies to go support the fire department, the police department, and the harbor. And so we don't have people in the community thinking, well, that's money that's just taken out of the WRF fund. So
you're referring to the cost allocation
we need to make a
plan.
change at this point, but for next year, something like that would be helpful.
Yeah, she's basically, I agree that I think we have to get this out and publish it, not for Homer, since he's the one who pointed this out to me to start with. But this implies we've got $55 million worth of revenue, and it's really like $35 or $40 million that we really have of revenue. So that'll be addressed next year per agreement so we can get this out. But I think I would say the general population would look at this and think that $55 million is coming in, and it's not. It's not really close to that.
And so that's what we tried to address in the new revised version, where it does show 35 million in revenues coming in, and we'll do something similar in the proposed and adopted budgets for 1920.
Well, that's really misleading, too. I mean, make a suggestion based on a comment that Barbara made during our interview sessions. This citywide thing here, to me, is not only misleading, it's confusing. I don't think this is for the average citizen, and I don't think they understand when you start talking transfers and funds, that's when they start losing it, in my opinion. This requires some work, but replace this one little section here with two pie charts. And I'm picking up on what Lois said at the last meeting about too many numbers. My first pie chart would be who pays for basic services that the city provides. And there's probably four categories there. There's the residents, there's businesses, there's tourists, and there's other government agencies. And then how much, and then the second pie chart below it is how much do these basic services cost? And you keep it really simple. You just do police, fire, water, sewer, street, building, and park maintenance, recreation, and administration. And understanding that you can't make that perfectly accurate when you start talking about the differences between the businesses and the tourists and stuff like that. But with some little bit of work and some of the data you have from HDL, I think you could come up with something that, or a subcommittee could come up with something, and it might be more self-explanatory to the citizens than trying to explain internal services fund.
So I think that's probably a good idea, to maybe reestablish the subcommittee and have a blend of ideas on that committee to work through some of these, so that we'll have a format for 1920 and accept that maybe this isn't going to go out this year.
Well,
that's just my idea. They may not agree.
Yeah. I'd still like to get something out, with what we have. I think we've spent.
All in agreement.
Yeah, okay.
Oh, I was thinking of the 1920 budget.
Yeah, right, for next year. Yes, and that's right. And I do know, I just did some very preliminary research, and a lot of cities out there, they take the general fund number, like there, 12.7 million, and they divide it by the population, and they come out. I mean, it is so easy and so straightforward. So So I started doing that a little bit, but the cities that were doing that, Riverside, Irvine, some of those that are in the CFMO and some of that training material that was provided years ago, but they're going to look almost twice as good as we are because they can spread their fixed cost nut over, thousands of citizens versus us. So I thought, well, maybe I could. I think I found one other city that had about 10,000. It was pretty close to us, but it would take a little more research. But it's so simple. Here's the per capita cost. And then my second idea was, you see all these homeowners associations and that charge fees. So I would just look at what all the citizens pay they don't pay any TOT. I don't know any citizens that live here that stay in hotels unless it's, a one-off because your house is being repainted. But I would take something like the sales and use tax and the property tax, which again is a small portion that goes back to the city, and whatever that is, 5 million, and I divide it by the number of households in Morro Bay or in any city and come up with, wow, each household is paying $1,000 a year in taxes between sales and property. And what are they getting? They're getting 24/7 police, fire, they're getting recreation, blah, blah, blah. So what is that, $80 a month or whatever the number is? It's cheaper than any homeowner's fee or anything else I've seen anywhere. So that I don't want to engineer it here, but that's something I'd be happy to serve with a couple people and just come up with something down and dirty. Keep it simple, very simple.
Okay, but what I'm hearing, what we need to decide now, are we saying we bless this, send it out, and all these comments are for next year?
Yes. That's what I think we're saying.
I move we send this report out as is.
Publish it, right.
We publish it and we...
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, so we got that. We have a motion carried 7-0. This, we recognize, may not be perfect, but we would like it published. However, and we're not talking mailers or anything, thousands of dollars. We're talking, print a few copies, leave them in the lobby. Let's see with those, the Polo survey that the city's doing. Let's see what kind of feedback we get. We'll talk to our acquaintances. And then for next year, we will establish a subcommittee. Maximum 3 people, and we'll look at maybe something simpler we could do.
We'll do that in the next city manager's update. We'll acknowledge that that's available on the website and at the city facilities so that people know it's there.
Ask them what I might put it on next door. I don't know. I'll see. And I haven't had too many negative comments lately, so maybe I can get something out there. And let's see what they say to us. We're open.
Okay.
I mean, we think we know they're going to come back and say it's too much, but we could be wrong. Okay. And then we'll do the subcommittee later. We don't think we have to do that now, right? Okay. Let's see what feedback we get on this. Okay, so anything else on item B3?
Nope, I think we have direction on that.
Oh, perfect. All right, that will bring us to item B4. What is that, the dwarf?
So this is the WARF update. The City Council asked that the monthly report be revised from what was proposed. So our project manager is working on that. In lieu of what we had intended to bring, we just provided you with a copy of the accumulated transactions report so you can see what was expensed. So far, that's not what our intention is going forward. Once there's an approved monthly report, we'll be taking from that to share with the committee. But again, wanted you to have something so you can see what's been expensed thus far. There were some questions that came in on some of the expenditures. I apologize for the providing the wrong Visa receipts. I saw that one first and just assumed that was the one we were looking for. So I think you have those all now. Our Public Works Director is here. He can go into some of the more detail of any of the expenditures if you have questions on them or want any more detail.
So just to summarize, I think at the last meeting we kind of discussed that we might just get this accumulated transaction listing. I think, Jennifer, you said it was pretty easy to do, and that we would just get that on a monthly basis just as a check register. Some of the comments we've had from citizens who's looking at the overall expenditures, and this covers, 9 months or 8 months, so it's not even going to be this many pages, but it's kind of a running list of, hey, here's what's being spent on WRF, so that we can take a high-level overview without and ask questions until such time or maybe if this is useful, the committee wants it every month, until such time as we get the quarterly report from the program manager on the WRF. And Jennifer, you said based on the comments, that would be the last city council meeting, correct? Where I think the council thought some of the samples were maybe too much and wanted something a little.
Yeah, so the proposed monthly report was quite detailed and extensive, so they asked it to be consolidated down some. I'll have to go back and look at my notes. I know we had talked in my office about maybe this level of detail. I don't know that was discussed at the committee, or I'm just having a brain fade on that. But we can go back and review that. If it's something the committee wants, I'm open to that. We were thinking of just being consistent with what was provided or what would be provided to council. So much like how we do our investment report, shared with the committee first, and then given to the council with any committee feedback. On that. So we can certainly discuss if this is useful or not, though.
Okay, thanks. Okay, so comments? Go ahead, Bart.
Can I assume that the organization and subtotaling on this detail will mimic the higher level reports? So we can literally go to a higher level summary. It's going to say legal services, something. And if we're interested in exactly what that was, then we can go here. So it's going to be in the same order, same arrangement, same organization. Subtotals are going to true up.
So a couple of caveats with this.
Depends on the day you run it.
No.
Well, it does.
Forgetting
actually.
the date when you run it, but will the organization be the same, or are they being reshuffled for some purpose that won't match this?
We are using the same. If the project manager or Public Works needs an account added, we add it here so that it should match what categories are being reported out. It does matter in terms of what date the report is run, because I can run a report on March 14th, and if it's not
I'm okay with the
yet,
dates. I get that the timing of this, and then
those numbers
when we're
will
paying bills
right.
that were in June, in February, there's going to be all kinds of things like that. But as long as the organization is the same, and also I'm not one for creating a lot of different reports for a lot of different audiences, because already we're paying Bill Knack, Black and Veatch to create project management reports. And then the other contractor they're doing their project management reports, so I realize we need a roll-up one, but leveraging these other reports that we're paying people to do, and not have the whole thing redone to repay for what is called soft costs, I'll call administrative or project management costs, I don't think is a good use of our funds. So just to try and streamline how many reports go to how many audiences to limit it, however that can be done.
Yeah, it's obviously a more cleaned up version instead of all this, sub-detail, but you'll have a chance to see the proposed monthly report when it comes back, hopefully in April, except that we'll have budget on our agenda for April, so that will take up a significant amount of the meeting, I would suspect. But you'll have a chance to see it again and provide comment if it's not meeting what your expectations are.
Thank you. What other comments or questions here on the accumulated transaction listing folks have?
Yeah, I do.
Okay, go ahead. I did too.
So some of the items in the transaction listing are water-related, but I understand that all of the costs for the overall project will be captured in this Fund 922. So will it be all the way until the project is complete that the water-related items get broken out into the water fund? Or how will that work?
So when we did the rate study, it was determined that 29% of the project would be funded from water and 71% would be funded from sewer. So at the end of the year when we fund this project, we'll split the costs 29-71 and transfer in money from water accumulation at 29% and 71% from the sewer accumulation.
So you're going to do that every year as part of your year-end closeout?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
But these are the total right now. You won't do that till the end of the year,
We
right?
haven't transferred or
Okay.
funded the project, if you will. We do that when we know the final project costs for the year.
Go ahead, Homer.
I just had a general question. Who's authorized to move money within the line items of the budget, of the project budget?
So by policy, what we have established is that within, and I'm going to use a different example than the wharf, within the police department, within the operating cost categories, that we can transfer between those internally. Between departments, we cannot. It comes back to the council. We recognize that there's more sensitivity with the wharf project, so we don't necessarily abide by that, and we bring those back with our quarterly budget updates to the extent that there would be transfers. We haven't expended the budget amounts in the last couple of years, so it hadn't been an issue. But as we're moving down through this, we would do updates and adjustments to approve through council.
Well, I compared the transaction report to the budget, and there's wild swings within what was budgeted and what the actual expenses are. And there were all small amounts, and I realize this is a $120 million project, and just 25,000 here or there, not a big deal. But there were a number of items that were expensed that there was no budget line item for. And I was just curious if there was some sort of formal procedure from moving money, for instance, from environmental permitting to engineering services or something along those lines. Is there any control over that, or is it, the budget was $9 million that was approved by the city council, so as long as we don't exceed $9 million this year, everything is cool?
So many of the items, and I would have to go back and look and see what you're looking at, but we have contracts that go for the council for approval. So if there was an amendment to the GIS contract, for example, we may not have captured that when it was approved by the council as an adjustment at this point. Does that make sense?
Well, I guess what prompted this is at last Tuesday's meeting, one of the council members asked whether or not there were funds available to accommodate the two amendments that were made for the grant writer and for the environmentalist. In the case of the grant writer, that, according to this transaction report, that budget amount has already been exceeded, and this addendum that was approved on last Tuesday night would have exceeded it well over 100%. And maybe it doesn't make any difference at this stage of the game, but going forward, shouldn't these budgeted line items be kind of followed?
So when we adopted the budget, if you recall, we had a conversation that it was contingent upon changes with the new program manager being hired. I'm looking at the budget performance report, and it looks like we're overexpended on labor costs applied. That one we would true up at the end of the year. It's very hard to predict, obviously, how many public records requests we're going to respond to and how many staff hours are going to be spent on this project. I know I didn't anticipate the number of staff hours I end up spending, so that one will be trued up when we have actuals. We're overexpended on miscellaneous operating supplies. I believe that might be where some of the copier charges were allocated to that we would need to correct. So that will, if that's not trued up, we'll look at that at third quarter. Same with legal services, and again, was truly an estimate, so we'll have to true that one up with respect to how much our attorneys have had to spend. But we will go through and true these up with the third quarter and fourth quarter reports. Well,
the point I was trying to make is that going forward, though, into the future years, that these line items are well thought out. When will maybe this is a question for Mr. Livick, when will there be an overall project budget published?
The overall project budget for the entire WRF program is the budget that is in the rate study.
Well, there's only two numbers in there. And
Well, I think there's more than, we
Well-
have each of the components, and we have construction costs and soft costs associated with each of those.
Yeah, but I'm saying it's still, I'm talking about a more, help me out here, Bart,
Granular.
will you please? The rate study's only got a couple things in it.
The reason a budget, from our perspective, is important is because it allows us to know whether we're in trouble, if we're going to be in trouble. So it gives us a target. So if you slip in one area, and even if you true it up, where's that money going to come from? It has to be offset either from contingency or from another line item. And I think that's what we're seeking, is a better understanding of how you're going to keep things from exceeding the overall budget. And it's a tool. It's a planning tool.
Yeah, so right now, we have $126 million, including contingencies, as our overall budget. The facility component has currently a guaranteed maximum price of about $67 million is what we would expect to pay for that. Some of the other components we don't know yet because we're still in design on those components. As those designs progress forward, we can refine those budget numbers. So as we move forward with, for example, the conveyance facilities, the 4 pipelines and 2 pump stations that'll drag wastewater back and forth across town, probably towards the end of this year, likely in November, December, we'll have a completed design, engineer's cost estimate. That'll be a new, fresh number. Then when we go out to bid on that project, we'll even have a better number for what it's going to cost. So we continue to refine those costs and reduce contingencies as we move forward.
Please don't get me on the contingencies. But what we had when I worked was a trend program. But you need to start with what Homer's talking about. There needs to be a reasonably detailed budget with, I don't know, what's a reasonable number of line items, say 100 at least. So when you put in another lift station that you hadn't planned for, you basically have some sense of, are you going to need contingency to pay that? Or whatever but a trend program. But there needs to be a budget at some granularity. I'm not saying it goes down to exactly pieces of paper and all that sort of thing. And even relative to if the $67 million is there, I don't know how firm that is. Typically, there are still scope changes that happen even within a fixed price contract.
Yes,
it's not fixed price doesn't mean it's not going to change.
Correct.
Because all of a sudden we're going to run into, I don't know, what you've got relative to what if they run into solid rock out there when they start digging. Or we change something. We change the flow rates. That's going to happen, and we need to have some sense of who's controlling this, because this idea that as we go down and reduce contingency, typically you're reducing contingency, but the costs, it's being used for something.
It's either being used or we don't need, for example, at the grossest level of estimates, you might have a 30% contingency. As you move forward to a better refined design, you might reduce that contingency to 15%.
Trust me, I know that when the $75 million estimate was brought before the council with a contingency, the implication was that 75 is going to end up being about 60 because we're not going to need the contingency. I can go back and show you but that's the context when contingency is used. Last meeting, it was said, well, what if we have a $25,000 contract or $35,000? It's only $25,000. Well, that could be. But typically what happens, we need more. So as contingency goes down, yes, it will. When we get to the end of the project, contingency is zero because it's done.
Right.
But we'll probably use that for things that come up. Contingency is there for 50-50 probability.
Right. And like I say, we won't know what this project cost us until we write the last check.
So let me get back to the budget piece, because that's what started this.
And I have some comments.
We are working this year. Last year you saw a very different operating budget look, and it had different information in it. This year, what we're trying to work on, and why I say we don't have time to do some of the other stuff is revising the capital budget. So we're doing a 5-year capital improvement plan that you will see 5 years out of budget for projects. The wharf is a 5-year long, less than 5 years at this point, but multi-year project. So there will be estimated budget numbers for 2021, 21, 22, as far out as construction would go. Those will get changed each year, as we know, we might make it or not, but you will see that 5-year capital improvement plan in the budget, or at least that's our goal, and that's what we've been working on. So in terms of a total project budget, you'll see that in April when we bring the proposed budget back.
And I think maybe some of these comments, if I can summarize, thank you, Rob, relate to, yes, we do need some more granularity. And as one of our colleagues, Bill, mentioned last time about the program manager about earned value, and that it's very easy to say when our budget this year is $9 million, $10 million, or an overall of 126 that we're doing fine. But what's going to happen when we get to 80% of earned value and we're at 123 million? And we're going to be saying to all of us collectively ourselves, how could this happen? So that's why we want the granularity, and I think we'll save some more comments on that, but that's what everybody's saying here, number one. Number two, when the Blue Ribbon Commission met, we also, and we have told our citizens that if we get more of the WIFIA and the SRF funding, that would impact those rates $6 to $7. So that $126 million will come down because of interest costs, and we, expect to be able to return that as lower rates, not increase the contingency and continue to drive the costs up. So as an example on the WRF, to our point, is when I see that first we procured some software called Procore for this, and then we see on some of the Rabobank that, or I think we heard that we purchased Office 365 Microsoft to do some planning and budget reporting. And then I see on one of the Rabobank that someone had asked about that is additional software for invoice verification. Now that may be all well and good, but that's 3 sets of software to manage components of this project that we don't have any budget to back that up against. Maybe we had $1 million in there for software, hopefully not, but just as an example, okay? I think that's where we're coming from here, correct, colleagues?
Yeah, Rob, yesterday you sent me the WIFIA proposal, which is very helpful to look at because it's broken out at a very granular level. At least it has what the construction costs are. It starts out with the WRF facility cost, the conveyance facility, and I think that's what we're talking about. What the construction costs are, it's the contract, the design build is $234 million, but then the conveyance, we have a budget for that, and we should, in the budget, put the relative pieces. And and I would hope Eric would have that. Eric had told me, and I haven't yet met with him, but in a casual conversation, that they also have Microsoft Project Management, which I think most of us are more familiar with using that. So I don't even know if that cost is already something that Corolla always has. Probably they do, but I think that would be very, very helpful, just kind of expanding what we've already given to WIFIA. And I guess it's being updated anyway as costs have changed, but just go down about 2 or 3 levels to get the granularity, which Eric has to have. How could he possibly be managing the program to come in at $126 million?
Yes, I think we have some gross information, but for example, when we purchased the markup program Bluebeam for $300 and something, we didn't have a line item for that because we didn't know we would need that item, and we did not plan to go back to council for authorization for that purchase because it was within the overall budget, which is our general operating procedures with our budget. We don't generally go back to council for movement between line items. It's just, except for staffing. We don't touch staffing items. But as long as we're operating within our approved operating budget, we're looking more at the bottom line for that year. But what I'm hearing is a little bit more than what Mr. Bose asked for example, on a annual budget, you would like to see a line item for many more than we have in there now, perhaps, is the desire of the board. We'll work with our finance department and see what's feasible to do that.
You currently have 13.
Yes, and we probably don't have everything that we need to use.
So the new format that we're working on has prior project costs. So it would be costs through June 30th of 18 are estimated. And then it would have carry forward costs from monies that are unexpended this fiscal year. And then it would have a proposed budget for 1920, a budget for 2021 through completion of the project. We haven't added additional line items at this point, but it sounds like the committee wants them. So we'll work with our project manager and public works director in figuring out what those line items.
Yeah, and I
need to
think we'll
be.
come back with more comments after that. You're right, maybe we don't need to be budgeting at 300, that Blue Beam is 900, I see Dropbox, I see a whole lot of things, and little things add up, and I think that's where, somehow we have to bring this down to, a little more granularity. That's all we're asking for. So, but when Eric comes back with what he's proposing based on the council direction, I presumably believe that will be a document we can live with and give us the budgeting and the performance that we need.
Will there be budgets at the GL account number level? I would assume, that's at least a step in the direction you're gathering costs in those buckets. You've decided that those are the ones that make sense to you. It seems like it would make sense that you would have budgets associated with those, and some that we haven't started using yet, and then it would all add up to 126 million, 24 million, or whatever it is.
Well, so we typically do lump some of them, like salary and benefits, for example, is personnel costs. We don't give the detail necessarily about which piece is salary and which piece is pension and what piece is,
Sure, that's
kind
fine.
of thing. We'll take your comments and your feedback, and we'll work on what we can incorporate into our new format to bring forward.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. Anything else on this item? Do you think we'll have that for the next month based on Eric's progress?
Do I think you'll have Eric's new monthly?
Yeah, right.
I can't. Rob, do you
Well,
think
you can't
that's
answer
yes, okay.
Oh, okay.
What we're hoping you'll have for budget is the proposed draft general fund budget for 1920, the Measure Q budget for 1920, and at a minimum, the WARF 5-year plan.
Okay. I did have actually one other question on the accumulated transaction. I see a lot of things there for legal services, proposed litigation. Can somebody summarize at the elevator level what that is? There's quite a few costs in there for that.
So we've had...
It's huge.
You're looking at the account 6101 legal services general?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
So we have had multiple public records requests that come in on I don't want to say daily, but at least weekly basis. All of those have to be reviewed generally by legal services. We've had letters that have come in regarding litigation and various other things that have to go to our legal team. There's
All specific to the WRF.
That's correct.
So if they come in for a public records request because they don't want to go to OpenGov or don't want to go to the website or anything else, then you have to spend all your time figuring out what the requesters want. And
We have to go through all of our emails, and depending on what the request is, it can be going through all of our emails, it can be going through all of the Prop 218 documentation, all of our contracts, staff reports, staff communications. It's a significant amount of staff time.
Okay. And there was another one, that another consultant listed in there where it was a $4,500 a month retainer fee for several months. Is that just no work but on hold?
That is the Ferguson Group, I believe.
Yes.
That's our lobbyist. So that's a retainer every month.
Okay.
Where's staff times in here? I've gone through it 5 times. I
Staff
can't
time.
find, like your time, Rob's time.
Yep, so
Sort of a, is it there? I'm just not seeing it.
It's not on the accumulated transaction report. It is on the attachment, or I can send you the budget performance report.
Okay,
It's
but
listed as labor cost applied, and so every hour I spend, I charge directly there instead of having it budgeted there.
Okay, so at least that item is not in the 2.276.
That was on the accumulated transaction total he's referring to.
Correct.
Okay, is anything else not there? Okay, that'll be in the budget though, right?
Yeah.
So when we
should
see the
go.
budget,
Yeah.
all of this plus staff personnel will all be there. Okay.
Does anybody have any other questions on that item? All right. I don't think I had any others. No questions, guys? Okay, so I think you have our comments and everything. We'll look forward to receiving the draft budget format for next month, and thank you for that. And then that brings us to the next item, which is receive the CAFR report. I believe that was also scheduled for the January meeting. We didn't have a quorum, but that is being provided more for summary and review. I would also mention that the auditor gave a very good summary and presentation to council the first meeting or was it the second meeting in February, the 27th or something, 26th?
I think it was February 13th.
Oh, 13th. Okay, February 13th. Thank you. Anyways, so, and I think those of you that have requested a copy that have received it, are there any questions or comments while we have Jennifer and Sandy here?
Is there any way that the report could get out sooner in the fiscal year, to wait until December?
Oh,
Is
we
it
ask
just
that
waiting
every
for the
year with
auditor?
Measure Cube. Go ahead, give the answer. I want to.
So our auditors typically will come on site in October, and it is a mad rush up until the end to get it out by December 31st, which was the deadline for GFOA. We didn't meet that the prior year. We're a little bit at the they have multiple that they do, so we're a little bit at the mercy of the auditors and when we can go back and forth with information.
And we also wait for the Measure Q, which technically ends June 30th, and we're doing that at holiday time too. So I've asked Jennifer before, maybe we can try to get that one out a little and get that one knocked off before the holidays.
Yeah, we don't love doing it right before the holidays either. So
Yeah, right. It is what it is. But go ahead, John, please, on the CAFR.
Yeah, Jennifer, when is the state controller's report submission deadline?
The city's financial one.
Yes.
So they revised deadlines. So streets is due in October, and the city's financial one is due January 31st. So we have our audits done. That's correct.
So the state controller's report is due in January for the financial transactions?
Yes.
Oh, great. It used to be like October.
Right, and the streets one I think still is, but they revised it recognizing that they weren't getting audited year-end numbers.
Okay, good. I'd like to make a recommendation because, Bill, like you, I'm a little disappointed with the schedule. And one of the things that we talked about, I guess it was back in, well, let me just run down the schedule real quick. So you have the December 31st deadline for the GFOA submission, which I think is a great thing that you're doing, and they're going to give you really valuable feedback, and it's a nice award to have. But usually in December, the council only has one meeting because the December the Christmas time meeting is normally canceled. So in order for the council to get that CAFR before it gets submitted to GFOA, it would have to be done at the first council meeting in December. And this year, this committee didn't get it until December 18th. And what we got was only a partial. And I really admire the fact that between December 18th and December 31st, you were able to get it submitted. So you obviously didn't take a Christmas vacation. But I'm just thinking, and when I inquired about this during that meeting, I believe Sandy said that there are some 85 schedules that have to be completed before the figures can be considered good enough to go to the auditor. And my recommendation is going to be that you budget some amount of money for next year to get some account temps or CPA or somebody in there to help Sandy and help the staff to get those reconciliations done so that this whole thing can follow a better schedule.
So I appreciate that as a recommendation. There's a significant amount of work internally to do. That's true. We are at the mercy. I guess my point is, I don't know that if we hired temporary staff and got those schedules done any sooner, that it would expedite the auditor's schedule. I don't know that they would come in sooner than October. I don't know even if they did come in sooner than October that they would be getting us draft information any quicker than they do. We pushed hard this year, and I'm not saying that lightly, to get it done and to get that information, and it was down to the wire, and there's only so much control we have over it once we get the work done. I happened to call GFOA today because I was submitting my card or my credit card for our submission of the CAFR award, and I couldn't find my receipt, so I called them to send me a new receipt for the backup for my credit card. And I mentioned to them, when do we hear about the award? Because I had forgotten. And she said, well, yours wasn't submitted until February something. I said, well, I submitted December 31st. We worked to make that deadline. She's like, oh, well, you have to remember, we get 3,000 CAFRs the last week of December. So we didn't enter yours until February, so you'll hear in August. So the December 31st deadline is not something that is unique to us and rushing to get it in. If they're getting 3,000 of them, across the country. But I think it's a rush for most cities. And we can push with the auditors again, and I'll inquire about the timeline. If it's something that they can meet and we can look at hiring staff, it'll be a question of budget and where that money's going to come from. But I just don't know that even doing that will expedite it.
Well, okay, so just a couple things. I think it's awkward that it gets submitted to GFOA as final before the city council receives and files it. And then the second thing is the document that we saw on December 18th was pretty rough. It wasn't complete, and it was pretty rough. So if there's any way that can be accelerated or improved, I think we would appreciate it for sure.
It's a fair comment. Like I said, we'll check with the auditors. I can't make promises to you because I don't think I can fulfill those. So I just want to be realistic. We'll check, we'll inquire, and try to push the deadline. But I don't know that it's going to change.
Thank you for those comments. Duly noted. What good points. Go ahead, Lois. Do you have anything? Okay. Any other comments on that item? All right. Then I'll bring to item, B6, items for the next agenda. And I think what I heard, we'll have the Measure Q budget, we'll have the budget, and these are both for 2019-20 fiscal year to review, and then we're going to have a draft from the WRF program manager on the WRF program budget to review. And what else do we have?
So just to clarify, a draft general fund budget, I don't think you'll have the other funds, such as, the impact fee funds and that kind of thing, but you'll have general fund, Measure Q, and a draft WARF project budget. To the extent that we can get the other capital budget pieces put together, we'll do that since it is a revised format. Those will be our priorities for April, and then the revised WARF report. And hopefully a third quarter investment report.
Okay. And one other thing that's been hanging on out there, what about the Coral Avenue sale and all that? Because now that we have these requests for Measure Q, is there something that you were going to bring to us on that?
Yeah,
to
so
pay down the loan?
The last conversation we had, the committee wanted to wait until the loan was paid off. I suspected that would be a question today, so I checked with Scott Graham on that. We haven't received payment for the remaining balance, and the reason is that the project is now held up in a Coastal Commission appeal. So they may even end up getting an extension on the final deadline of payment in October because it's through no fault of their own that there's an appeal and it's being held up with Coastal Commission.
Okay. So you anticipated my question. Thank you. But you'll hear in another 6 months, I'll bring it up again, I guess. Okay. Sorry to hear that, but thank you for the status. Appreciate it. Go ahead.
Yeah, before I volunteered to become a member of the committee, I attended a meeting in December, and I think it was David recommended we have an offsite or a one-day training session for those that need a little more knowledge of government financing, and I'm certainly one of those. So if there's some way to educate at least me more on all the different ways that fund accounting is being handled, the 18 funds, although I'm very knowledgeable of 3 funds, why the other 15, and just to give that kind of explanation.
Yeah, so I think Mr. Beckman had asked about a CAFR training at one point, and there's been inquiries about OpenGov training. We're open to scheduling that and getting that done. Realistically, it will be in the summer when we're through the budget process. Just to have time to put something together that would be meaningful and useful.
Has that been done before, you said? There has been?
There's been requests, but we haven't done a training.
Excuse me. I'm still going through those books you ordered us. I periodically read a couple of that 25. I think that was a very good. If anybody's finished with their book and wants to pass it on to Bill or Lois, it's actually, I thought it was kind of a handy guide.
I think I have 1 or 2 extras.
Oh, that
so
might be
I'll look for those and try to get them for you.
It's a paperback, but it's good reading. I mean, as good reading can be for this stuff, but yeah.
That's one of the challenges of doing a training is to make it useful and interesting.
Yeah, it
right.
is.
It's a little bit of a dry topic when you're talking about a CAFR.
It's not a textbook. It's and you can break it up into little sections and those of you that have background in other accounting, I think it's very helpful. So I thought it was a good investment. Okay, so is that all we have? Do we have any other closing comments or anything? I'll mention that the WRFCAC meeting, the next meeting is Tuesday, April 2nd, 3 o'clock here at Vets Hall. And we're going to be going over some program management and I think some information there. So if anybody's interested in that, that might be a meeting you would like to either attend or watch on Channel 20 if you get that through Charter. So, okay, thank you all. Meeting adjourned, 5:25.